So to me at least, it feels like it is finally time. Finally time to take another in-depth look at some of the DLC-sized or otherwise overhaul mods coming to Fallout 4. As many of you guys do know, I make a video like this almost seasonally, taking a look at some of these larger overhaul mods, what they've recently posted, what they're actually trying to do. But something a little bit more unique with this one is we actually, one, have several new additions, several new mods that have gotten significant updates or naming over the past 7 months since the last iteration, but also some that I actually reached out to the mod author directly and got some exclusive stuff that you haven't seen before. With one such mod that you probably never even heard of before, but should be excited for, especially considering it's not even that far out from release. But to be a little bit more elaborative, if maybe this is the first time you're seeing a video like this on my channel, basically what we focus on in this series is just looking in depth at some of those massive modding projects. There's a lot of big stuff out there, but typically the things I cover in this series are projects that might take several years to actually create. Fortunately now, after doing it for several years, some of them already have many years of progress in them. If you like pretty much anything you do see, I'll have links to literally everything down below, whether you want to check out some of those videos in their full form or even just join the social media channels. So first and foremost, a mod that you probably heard of already, we do have Fallout 4, the Capital Wasteland project. What this is going to be a pretty faithful recreation of Fallout 3 in Fallout 4's engine. It's not necessarily tackling everything at first, but most of the major things you see in Fallout 3, and in fact that you could see already recreated in the background footage, but in Fallout 4 with all the engine upgrades that come along with that, and of course just looking a lot better. One disclaimer I do definitely want to get out of the way. Recently the mod did kind of shut itself down. They stopped working on the mod after some news from Bethesda, that being when they were informed they wouldn't necessarily be allowed to actually use the original voice files from Fallout 3, but since then they have started production up again, and what they're doing is just re-recording all of the Fallout 3 voices. By the way, just looking a little bit more closely at the mod, over the past year we've gotten a lot of footage of various things, whether it be just completing some of the various quests you can see, taking us through some of those very iconic locations which just look really awesome, or even of course getting to see some of the very notable NPCs that you're familiar with. As far as their activity goes more recently, just a couple of months ago they actually released this cinematic for the mod. It's a pretty faithful recreation of the Fallout 3 intro. The intro we've pretty much all seen at this point, and although of course this isn't concrete gameplay or anything like that, it gives you a great look at some of the assets they have created for this mod and just how much better it actually looks. You can do an easy before and after comparison and see how much better this mod will look over the original Fallout 3 version. Outside of that, they've actually been very active releasing things for us to play already. Many of these mod projects do this, and you'll hear a lot more about this throughout this video, or more or less as they develop some of the assets, whether it be items, armors, or even other things. They release them as free mods right now so that we could start playing with them immediately. This project in particular has been doing this for quite a while and has a lot of stuff out there already, but even just the past couple of months, they released the Fallout 3 metal armor, this being one of the most iconic armors you of course saw in all kinds of raiders in Fallout 3. You could add this into your Fallout 4, use it on yourself, or even more cool, it actually integrates into the level list of Fallout 4's raiders, so you'll just see raiders wearing this iconic armor. Outside of that, we also saw retextures for both the feral ghouls and the regular ghouls in Fallout 4, making them, one, I think just actually look a lot cooler, but also look way more in tune to how they looked in Fallout 3. Both these mods look particularly cool and interesting, and even further, there's a really nice trailer to go along with it, showing a little bit more in-game gameplay of this new mod as it comes together. Oh yeah, and they also released a mod that makes the underwear in Fallout 4 more similar to how it was in Fallout 3, if you're interested in that kind of thing. Taking it all together, as you guys can naturally see, they've made a lot of progress, and a lot of which they've actually shared with us through these free mods we can download. But even outside of that, they're pretty active in the community, posting consistent updates on their Discord as far as progress goes, or just little teaser images of what they're currently working on. But of course, following the Fallout 3 remake, you also have to take a look at the Fallout 4 remake mod, that with Fallout 4 New Vegas. This one in particular, I know many of you are excited for, as just speaking broadly, in the Fallout community, Fallout New Vegas is viewed as one of, or the best Fallout game. So to put it simply, much of what I mentioned or said about the Fallout 3 Remake mod can be applied to the Fallout New Vegas Remake mod. The two teams are independent, although occasionally when creating assets they actually will share them. Many of the assets between Fallout 3 and New Vegas are actually identical, and Fallout 4 New Vegas will be taking a similar approach of re-recording all of the original voice lines. Although it has been mentioned in the past, they won't necessarily restrict themselves by this, making it a bottleneck where they can't continue, so you could potentially see beta builds of the mod that don't have it fully voiced but do have much of it playable. This too is a mod project that has released many trailers over the past couple of years. You can find many of them on their YouTube channel, of course, linked down below, and in particular many of these actually giving us a look at some of the various weapons or armors that are making a return and some of the world space and combat systems integrated with this. Fallout 4 New Vegas is also re-implementing several of those unique New Vegas features. From some of the gameplay you could see the old perk and skill system making a return. We also got this gameplay just a few months ago, which is just very special. I highly recommend almost everyone giving it a watch. But as of late from the mod team, what we've been seeing is actually a variety of teaser images showing off some of the various assets they're creating, and of course that world space also. New Vegas world space and environment was pretty unique compared to a lot of the other Fallouts. As such, a lot of the weapons or armors we got from that game are some of the most iconic of the entire series. And you can see from many of these screenshots pretty faithful recreations, of course looking a lot better than they did in New Vegas. But also just the desert landscape as a whole looks pretty great here. You can find updates to some of these iconic NPCs and just some of the other things we'll see in this Wasteland. And although many of these are exciting to look at or to get excited to eventually once play with, this mod actually has one of the largest back catalogs of weapons from New Vegas being released right now that you could download for Fallout 4. Many of these are very iconic and you probably already downloaded because they were super popular mods on release. As of late, we've gotten a couple of new ones. We got the N99 10mm pistol, that of course being the very iconic pistol from this game. This is really well implemented into Fallout 4. It only came out around a month ago now, and for me at least, it's pretty much earned a mainstay in my load order, but also a couple of other things, like a dog meat modification mod, implementing some of the different looks we saw from dogs in the Mojave and Capital Wasteland, but now you can apply them to dog meat in Fallout 4. But of course, with one big release earlier this year, we did get the anti-material rifle, this being a massive addition to Fallout 4 and without a doubt one of the most fun weapons to use from Fallout New Vegas. But that's actually not all. Those are without a doubt the two most popular remake or recreation mods in the Fallout franchise, but there's actually a relatively new mod project, that with Project Arroyo, and I definitely butchered that. What this mod is attempting to do is actually recreate Fallout 2 in Fallout 4's engine, that obviously being quite a bit more significant and notable. Fallout 2 looks like this, not like Fallout 3, 4, or New Vegas. And for that reason, even though this is one of the newest or youngest of these recreation mods, it's also one of the ones I'm most hopeful for. A whole generation of people never experienced Fallout 2, and this could give you that opportunity. Although as I mentioned, it is a relatively young mod, they still have quite a bit of progress already done. You can check out some of those iconic locations that some of you who played Fallout 2 will remember, and those who haven't should just get excited to experience these in a 3D landscape. Over the past few months, they have had these periodic updates sharing batches of images showing off some of the additional progress or new assets created for the mod. And all in all, this one is probably one of the most interesting because it's the only one that's actually messing with scale or has to even worry about that. With Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 3, you could pretty much just look at how big things were in the 3D worldscape of those games and then create that in Fallout 4. But taking the top-down view of this city and recreating that in a 3D setting is obviously quite a bit more difficult. You can't just go off the same proportions because they're going to look a lot more different. Either way, this is definitely one to keep your eye on. I don't think Bethesda has any plans to make a Fallout 2 in 3D anytime soon, so I would say for a long time, this is the only project we really have to rely on. So although that really covers some of the remake mods we're seeing coming to Fallout 4, there's a lot more that isn't a remake mod. A lot of other content that is on the way. One of the first ones that I do just want to mention, it's actually totally unnamed, there's no real details out on it yet, is actually a Sim Settlements expansion. Sim Settlements being one of the coolest mods to release for Fallout 4, but there's more on the way. With Sim Settlements, they actually take a fairly short time from announcement to release, so when you do finally get the full reveal of this expansion, you'll know you won't don't have to wait that long. But even further, the original creator behind Sim Settlements, King Gath, actually has a very regular podcast series on his channel. On that, he's featured basically the heads or notable figures of almost every Overhaul mod out there, almost every mod I cover in this video. I'll have a link to that down below, but also notable is I'm actually on the podcast, the one releasing today. So you can check out a podcast between me and him if you go to his channel now also. Although then we come to the next mod that is coming to Fallout 4, and this one's a little bit more unique, as I imagine many of you probably haven't heard about it thus far. There's a couple of YouTube videos on the mod author's channel, but outside of that, there really hasn't been much publicity around this one. Well, at least until now. So the mod in question is called The Machine and Her. At its core, it's going to be a new companion mod, but this is definitely one of those companion mods that really goes above and beyond, as well as it's not just a companion. There's a story affinity system here, and actually features 4 to 5 hours of new story content, but also a really nice add-on to that, a new lore-friendly radio station featuring 42 new songs. And yes, it'll have a DJ. So even though at first glance you might just think, oh, it's just a companion, but it's really not. There's actually a lot of unique and interesting things going on around this one. The new story added in will feature a new faction as well as custom voiced NPCs, and actually one pretty cool feature of this is when there's a particularly monumental story moment, you'll see some of these custom made cutscenes that will make it really stand out to you. You'll be able to tell, okay, this is something big, it's not just typical dialogue. And mind you, the video you're seeing right here is actually just an alpha build and quite old at this point. The companion's affinity will be affected by the main story of Fallout 4, but also this new custom added in story. But even further, this affinity system is going to be different than the existing affinity system with companions. It's not just going to be the companion likes or dislikes that, but rather there's going to be a trust and cynicism component. Certain actions you do will actually build trust with this companion, such as actually talking to her and hearing out what she has to say, not just saying I'm not interested, as is always a dialogue option. So you could have high or low trust, but also separate is cynicism. Depending on your actions, the companion may become more or less cynical, which will give her a darker outlook on the world overall, as well as actually affect the main story outcome. There's also a lot of other smaller features, such as actually having the ability to just ask them to lockpick something from the door itself, not having to go through menus or commanding them. And one of my favorite features of this is actually something dubbed the bark system, and honestly, just listen to it. This is really awesome.
Ain't my first gunfight, rookie!
No, but it's gonna be your last.
I got all day!
That's actually pretty sad, man.
Ain't personal, just you or me.
Bad news. It's gonna be you.
Come on, girl. Let's do this!
Do what? Could you be more specific?
So basically what you just saw was some of those canned Raider lines that if you played Fallout 4 you've heard numerous times, except this companion will have a canned response back to them, which is just absolutely amazing. All in all, that's just a glance at what this mod is going to do. There's a lot of other features I didn't even mention for the sake of time, but it's shaping up to be a very cool and interesting one. And even further, it's actually entering into its final stages, so again, the wait might not even be that long. And one added bonus feature of this one is that it is confirmed to be coming to Xbox. But then we have a look at what is Fallout Liberty Hell. What this is going to be is another large-scale overhaul mod, but this time adding in post-apocalyptic Philadelphia. Naturally, Philadelphia is a location with a ton of lore, history, and well, this mod is taking full advantage of that. You can see some of the very iconic locations being developed in a post-apocalyptic Fallout setting, and it looks pretty awesome. At first glance, you might think this mod has been fairly inactive as of late, but it's actually quite the contrary. Reaching out to some of the devs on this project, as I actually did with pretty much every mod you see in this video, they describe how heavy development is going on behind the scenes. But even further, on their ModDB page as well as their YouTube channel, just recently they posted several videos and screenshots showing off exactly what they've been doing. Their most recent August video in particular clearly shows a beautiful world space with actually some really diverse environments. That's been one of the things that stood out to me around this mod in particular. A lot of the landscapes look distinctive, not just kind of one solid common theme all throughout as we see with many Fallout games, but some genuine variation. Even further, you of course see some of these locations that just look awesome and really exciting to explore. I feel like with this mod in particular, they're really embracing that post-apocalyptic aspect, but even outside of that, they've shared several screenshots of a variety of things. More of the same, the landscapes, objects being created to flesh out those landscapes, but also a myriad of different items that are currently a work in progress and hopefully hopefully we'll get to experience one day. Many of these looking really cool and actually already really high quality. I have a link to this full trailer down below if you guys do want to check it out. It actually is really well done and I highly recommend you give it a watch. But then with something a little bit different, we also do have Fallout London. So this one's a little bit more unique compared to actually everything else I'll show you in this video, mainly because Fallout London is the one and only up and coming Fallout 4 mod, at least the only one I cover in this video, that's leaving the United States. This is significant because Fallout lore is so closely aligned with US history, and Fallout London moving outside of that is definitely taking that into consideration. Fallout London, although being similar in a post-apocalyptic sense, will be different in some of the overarching themes you see throughout its story and just among the people. It'll explore more of the class divide, Euroscepticism, and the state as a whole's desire to actually be seen as a world superpower. Similar to Sim Settlements, Fallout London seems to be taking one of those approaches where they're not sharing a ton until it's fairly close to release. As of right now, there is a trailer out there showing this very unique landscape. Fallout London is described as being roughly the size as Far Harbor and being actually way more urban than most other Fallout games. The reason they're able to do this is, as you're exploring through some of the major cities, you'll encounter a door that actually will enter you into a separate world space, making it so you can have a very urban environment but not get the FPS issues you do see in downtown Boston. On their Discord right now, you can actually find a ton of teaser images and just work in progress pictures of what they're doing, what they're working on, a lot of it looking very exciting. Something you may actually be able to check out and download relatively soon from this mod is the M72 Gauss rifle. This is actually inspired by one of the weapons to appear in the OG Fallouts, but they're recreating it in its full 3D glory, and as you can tell, it looks particularly cool. So nearly every mod I've talked about in this video thus far has a common theme. It's typically going to be involving new story components, new NPCs, and most of the time even some new world space. Although there will be a pair of mods coming to Fallout 4 that don't fit this exact mold when it comes to DLC-sized content, that being Wars and Peace. So taking first a look at Wars, what Wars is the Weapon Addition Replacement Suite. This is going to be a comprehensive overhaul of all of the ballistic weapons appearing in Fallout 4. If you played Fallout 4, you probably know some of the guns, although having a ton of customizability, are otherwise somewhat lackluster. They leave a bit to be desired, and Wars is attempting to address that. So for some of the existing weapons, you'll see flat out replacements. The combat shotgun turns into a USAS 12, the combat rifle a Mini 14, but also a variety of weapon additions, fleshing out some of the leveled lists, or even just adding in additional customization options to existing weapons, making them actually quite a bit different in the process. Outside of just some of the weapon overhauls, there's also going to be combat mechanic changes. So rather than Fallout 4 being the rather simple, almost arcade shooter that it is right now, and making it a bit more immersive and survival focused. This is meant to be a fairly comprehensive overhaul to the weapons in Fallout 4 overall. We don't have many mods doing this, and it's been a work in progress for quite a while, and there's a lot that has already been accomplished, as you can tell by a lot of these screenshots. And although Wars does have a detailed history, one of the newer things to pop up around this is actually a sister mod, that with Peace. Peace is actually by the same mod author with Anastar, and basically what Peace stands for is Project Extend and Change Everything. Speaking broadly, Peace is going to affect all of the gameplay aspects of Fallout 4 that require overhaul that Wars doesn't already affect. So while Wars is combat and weapon focused, Peace is going to basically be anything else that doesn't fall into that initial category. Peace is still relatively new, so there's not quite as much to show, but even from what we've seen thus far, it's going to be impacting several systems. Weapon storage and where you're going to leave some of your items, but also how you're going to carry your items. Peace will feature an encumbrance overhaul, so your strength determines how much you can hold, but now you're actually going to need a backpack or some other kind of bag to actually hold those things. Even if technically you're strong enough to carry 50 weapons, you're going to need something to put them all in, and Peace is really taking that idea and applying it. It's also adding in other things like medical braces to gradually heal your broken limbs over time, making it so Stimpaks no longer automatically heal your limbs, but rather Hydra makes a return, although it is a lot more risky to use Hydra as just a quick fix compared to just using medical braces. It's also, broadly speaking, going to remove some of the magical enchantments you could find on clothing, because that just doesn't make a ton of sense in this game. So overall, taking these two mods together, even though they are separate sister mods to one another, it's really going to be a comprehensive overhaul to make Fallout 4 a lot more immersive and realistic. More of a focus on survival elements and actually preparing your character accordingly, which I for one am actually quite excited for. Many of these new systems and mechanics seem like, although relatively simple at first glance, will actually totally change a playthrough, have a significant impact as you try and complete the game following the mod's installation. But then, if that all wasn't enough, we also do have Fallout Cascadia. Fallout Cascadia is going to be another pretty much total conversion mod, adding in a totally separate world space that with Seattle for you to explore, but all based in Fallout 4's engine. But Fallout Cascadia, unique to some of the others, is meant to be experienced as a new game. Years after the events of Fallout 4, you experience Fallout Cascadia as the Drifter, and along the way, you naturally experience unique environments, some familiar faces, some not so familiar faces, and a totally separate and unique story, although obviously with some of the returning factions, there is definitely some interconnectedness. They also are taking a step back away from what Fallout 4 did with the protagonist and actually just giving you your own totally unique character in the sense that you can do whatever you want. Do you want to be a male, a female, something else entirely? They're really going back to that RPG core, allowing you full options as to what you want to make the main protagonist with the Drifter be. Although we don't know a ton about the actual story components of Fallout Cascadia, it certainly feels like they've been holding some of that information pretty close to the chest. They actually have a podcast series with some of the main writers on the mod that have been sharing details about various things, including some of the major factions or NPCs. One of the core factions and story components here is going to be the Republic of Cascadia. In effect, these guys are actually going to be very similar to the New California Republic, which is interesting because the New California Republic is also in this mod. The ROC is going to be based around the city of Cascade. This is actually on top of what used to be Seattle before the bombs dropped. Cascade almost has a castle layout. Giant walls surround the city, but as you get further and further inward, making through additional walls, it becomes increasingly prosperous. And just in general, this is not a starving or struggling city. There certainly are some poorer regions, but overall, they're doing okay here. And as a result, you'll see specialization and some interesting tasks come up. Cascade's actually in a standoff with the New California Republic, who are working their way northwards from California, but then actually just hit this wall and were like, hey, we can't pass, so they went to war, and now, as I mentioned, not much is happening. Although it certainly seems like this conflict could be a major story component or something we to some degree influence. There also are the Red Leafs, which are unique as this is actually a Canadian faction. The Red Leafs never wanted to be part of America. If you don't know, in Fallout lore, the US actually annexed Canada, and the Red Leafs were some holdouts, but then the bombs dropped and you're just kind of like, well, it doesn't matter anymore, right? The Red Leafs are also pretty against the Republic of Cascadia. The Republic of Cascadia in general just does some questionable things, but this is a much smaller and weaker faction, relying way more on guerrilla warfare, and actually partnering with some other locals to try and overthrow Cascade. And although those are some of the major factions, there's also some sub-factions that are described, but something pretty interesting that they will have here is what they describe as the Big Six. These are basically 6 notable NPCs that you'll encounter in this mod that you'll pretty much always encounter, regardless of which story path you do take. Story paths are one of the other interesting parts of Fallout Cascadia. There's going to be one main quest, but actually 3 separate quest lines branching out of that. The first act will largely be the same, kind of like what we see in Fallout 4, but after that, you're going to have the option to actually either side with the Republic of Cascadia, or alternatively the Red Leafs, or a third option is actually to side with the game's antagonist. Although we don't know much details about him and they're not really sharing much. But with this mod, these choices will come with consequence. If you choose to side with the Red Leafs, the Republic of Cascade will react to that and treat you differently. Similar to, again, many of these other mods, they have several released mods. None of these are super recent, you haven't missed any new releases, but a lot of these, even some of the older ones, are actually really cool. One such one they released is the Service Rifle, and modders have actually created an expansion project around this, so even though the core mod is fairly old, you can actually get a lot of additional features to it by adding on this additional mod that has been getting regular updates. And also, they did recently announce that the mod is coming sooner than people think. Not a single single project on this list has a concrete release date, but that is interesting, and it certainly gets you curious about where this is going. So although Fallout Cascadia is seeking to craft a totally new and unique game experience, Fallout Miami, on the other hand, is seeking to create a DLC-sized experience that is simply taking a sidetrack from what you see in Fallout 4. Fallout Miami is probably one of the mods on this list to get the most attention as of late. The recent trailer got millions of views and a lot of interest in the Fallout modding scene overall. If you're not familiar with this mod, what it's doing is adding in post-apocalyptic Miami, and of course everything that comes along with actually building that world space. Unlike some of the other mods on this list, this is actually going to take place in Miami Beach, so a unique environment coming with, of course, unique NPCs, and actually several unique factions. As with many of these mods, the factions are going to make up a decent chunk of the story with Fallout Miami. This will feature two notable joinable factions, that with the Nuclear Patriots. Envision these guys almost like a biker gang, except they don't actually use bikes. They use these crazy off-road vehicles that look very Mad Max-esque and just in general pretty awesome. And they have their own morality, their own form of Wasteland justice. But the other joinable faction will be the Enclave. This is going to be a very unique detachment of the Enclave. The Enclave were sent out here to retrieve something very specific and special in the past. It was a failure, so then a separate Enclave detachment was sent out years later, and now they have established a base around this, as well as actually feature some custom power armor and of course their own custom story, but largely with that same ideology you know and love of rebuilding America. Those are the two joinable factions, but outside of that there also are the Dreamers and the Cubanos. The Dreamers are more or less going to be a very chem addicted group that seems to be a core part of their identity, and it almost seems like these guys will be Raider-esque, although they don't use weapons, and they're always trying to look for their next fix. The Cubanos finally are a very mafioso type group. They actually owned a lot of the prominent locations in this area before the Great War, some of the hotels, casinos, and in general would facilitate some of the shady dealings you could find in the area. Through some of the concept art and in-game imagery shared, you get a pretty good idea of some of the world space or locations that these factions will inhabit and eventually you'll get to explore. Also, with it being Miami, such a unique and different landscape, we also get quite a few unique items and NPCs that really make the world just stand out a little bit more. These absolutely amazing looking gator claws in particular get me really excited for this mod. I imagine these are going to be one of the more terrifying enemies to encounter. At a quick glance, it may actually look like Fallout Miami is starting to slow down or hasn't been as active as before, but in reality, what they're doing now is seasonal updates to the mod. So rather than having a monthly progress update with a little amount of content, they have a seasonal update, seemingly for a year in each quarter, that has a lot of content, a lot to share around the recent additions and happenings. In their most recent seasonal update, they shared a lot. Some exploration footage giving you a really good idea as to what this is all going to look like, some animations on an SMG that will hopefully be releasing at some point, and speaking of which, they also did release their own weapon mod for Fallout 4 that you could download right now, this being a very unique and well integrated quad barrel shotgun that is honestly just a blast to use in game. And if all that wasn't enough, Fallout Miami is also bringing several new and interesting features into Fallout 4's engine. Gambling is making a return. You know, the slave trade is going to be active here, and we're going to have some moral decisions to make around that. One of the things that gets me particularly excited about Fallout Miami is, unlike some of these other projects that are really trying to tackle a new game, this one can be better described as just a DLC. Not saying that it's small by any means or anything they're doing should be downplayed, but hopefully with the team behind it, with how much work they have done already, that means we might see this one a little bit sooner. And based off what I've been showing you and what you've been hearing, hopefully you're looking forward to it as much as I am. But speaking of not having to wait too long, one final mod I do want to show you that we only just heard about and may in fact be the closest to release is Grim. So Grim really only had its debut publicly a couple of weeks ago now, but it looks pretty amazing. In effect, what this mod is going to be is a comprehensive horror overhaul for Fallout 4, affecting nearly all aspects of the game and making it just a bit scarier, a bit more terrifying. So there's a couple of core components here. First, you do have the visual overhaul. There will be an ENB attached to this. There's a myriad of different effects to choose from, and you can tweak these all to your liking. There's a couple of particularly cool presets that obviously will up the horror vibe, and one in particular that stood out to me. You could actually apply a found footage effect to Fallout 4 to really up the ante and make things just a bit more terrifying. Although outside of just the visuals, there's also going to be an audio overhaul in the game. Certain events will cue cue certain sound effects, as well as several of the new creatures, which we'll get to, do also have their own custom sounds, at least some of them. Some of the new weather added in will also have unique sounds to go along with it, which can be pretty terrifying. But one of the biggest parts of this, the one that will probably stand out the most initially, is the music. Music can really change the tone or feel of a certain situation, and just watch this. Even just watching that clip actually gets me kind of nervous and my heart rate racing a little bit. But we've seen mods do all of that in the past. Where this one really goes to the next level is in some of the other things it also adds in. There'll be a ton of new spooky and scary creatures to really complete this experience. You can find werewolves, ghosts, skeletons, and even some scary girls dressed in black or other weird clothings. There will be new weapons and armors also, but there's actually a new custom mechanic added in with this known as the curse. Not a ton is known about this, but it'll really change up some environments of Fallout 4 and give you a distinctively unique experience. If you wander off some of the main roads, you'll find some terrifying things, and it's really just overall gonna make the game a lot scarier. It seems like this mod is fairly far along and could be pretty close to release, so that's definitely worth getting excited for. We're of course only a couple of months away now from October, which is when these kinds of mods tend to flourish, which that's kind of crazy. October's not even that far. But even outside of that, the way this mod will be unique is in how comprehensive it is. We have a lot of mods affecting all of the individual components, but there's nothing out there right now that affects the game so holistically like this mod does. But yeah, taken all together, that is a look at the 12 massive DLC-sized Overhaul mods on their way to Fallout 4. This was a massive video. It took a lot of time to edit together, do all of the research, get all of the assets. I'll have links to literally everything down below. If you have a skill set or if you just want to find out more about one of these mods, I'll have recruitment forms, Discord channels, other social medias also just to keep up to date. And yeah, it's going to be a great year for Fallout modding. Several of these projects will probably come out in 2019, and hopefully come 2020, the next iteration of this video, there'll be less than 12 mods, not because the projects are dying, but because finally some of these mods are starting to come out. Some of the big overhauls are probably still a couple of years away, but significant progress is being made, and it's definitely a great time to be playing Fallout 4. With all that being said, I thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.